social and community organizing called Community Economic Development, as well as a number of years being involved in anti-racism work. And I think that one of the points that the American Dilemma book pointed to, but didn't quite actually, I don't think, is highlighted enough. And I think that is one of the major challenges that we face as a society, is how much of the division and inequality that Myrdal is talking about, and that we, as we live in this society, experience, is rooted in something that was made reference to, which is that the hundreds of years where the American society worked to dehumanize people of African descent. Hundreds of years in order to justify treating people as property. They had to convince themselves it was okay because they really weren't people. Well, the Civil War came along, but there was really never the same effort that was put into creating this kind of mindset and idea there was never as much effort putting into, giving post-traumatic stress disorder treatment to that population. So, in looking at the film, I think that it's an interesting treatment. It does bring some insights. However, I don't think it wasn't necessarily meant to, but I don't think it really goes far enough, because all of us know, and I'll stop because I'm supposed to be the moderator. I'll stop now. And after each of the moderators take probably a little bit less time than I did, then we'll hear from comments from the audience.
Okay, I'm Ray Ealy. I'm a minister at New Fellowship Baptist Church. I'm former head of OBU Outreach for Southern New Hampshire Outreach for Black Unity. I've worked in the community for years around issues of race, equality, inclusion, and just doing whatever I can when I can in different situations. And the only thing I disagree with in the movie was he said that the civil rights movement wasn't a success. It was a big success for people like me. Because had it not been for the civil rights movement, I'd have been working in the cotton fields. Because I have worked in the cotton fields. That's where I came up. And my mom worked there. So it was a big success for a lot of people. We kind of fell off, but it was a success. I'll let it go, Chief.
Wow. Good. How are you? Good evening. My name is Eddie Edwards. I live in Dover, New Hampshire. My background, I've been in New Hampshire for close to 27 years. I served in the United States Navy over in Portsmouth. Until I ended my service time, I became a correction officer in the state, Stratford County Department of Corrections. I worked there for 5 years. I then attended the New Hampshire Police Academy, where after a number of years of serving in law enforcement, I became the Chief of State Liquor Enforcement for the state. I was also served as the Administrative Prosecutor for State Alcohol Enforcement. I was very proud of my success at the State Liquor Commission because I was able to lead that agency became the first nationally accredited law enforcement agency in New Hampshire as a statewide law enforcement agency. There are 230 police departments in the state. 8 are nationally accredited, and the Liquor Enforcement Division was the first in the state of New Hampshire to be a statewide law enforcement agency, nationally accredited. And a year after I left, they gave it up. So I retired from there and took a job as a local police chief when I was asked by the New Hampshire Chiefs of Police Association to take over a small police department. I did that for a year. I retired from there, and then I ran for state senate in District 4 under the Republican ticket. And now I currently serve as the Director of Community Relations for Congressman Frank Kenta.
What did you think about the video?
My assessment of the film, because I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and my assessment of the film, I have not that my perspective of life is right, but I think I have a unique perspective because I grew up in the South. My grandparents were sharecroppers. My grandparents also were very conservative. I came to New Hampshire as a police officer, so I see race in New Hampshire in a very different way. I can clearly tell you there are challenges with racism in law enforcement, but not to the degree that some would imagine. I think the bigger challenge is the number of laws that we pass in the state and how they're enforced. It's much more the issue. And so having that perspective, my view of this film is that I think we've come a long way. And I think we don't give ourselves enough credit for that. I think the thing that continues to divide us, and some may disagree with this, are associations. And I say that because I look at police departments. I did some work with Chicago Police Department, New York City Police Department. And I was amazed to find that they had separate unions. There's a black police officer union, there's a Latino police officer union, there's a gay and lesbian police union, there's a female union, and so when you have 5 or 6 different unions in the same department, no one's advocating for proper police procedures, they're advocating for their own interests. And so when I look at our country and I look at our state, when we put ourselves in silos, we're advocating for what we believe in, not as a unit. So that's what I got for this film.
I'm Jack Resch. I'm a professor of history at UNH-Manchester, and I've been teaching courses on social justice and democracy and race. And believe it or not, I taught a course on Gunnar Myrdal to my seniors at a humanities seminar. They survived it, and I think they learned quite a bit from it. I reviewed my notes before coming this evening, and what really struck me is how timely that 1944 volume is. And if you're interested in really looking fresh at things that are happening today, that historical study by a sensitive social scientist who asks deep questions, doesn't deal a lot with cliches, really does put racial issues in America today into an historical perspective that is extremely useful. A couple of things come to mind when looking at the film. One of them is Myrdal is optimistic about America. He loves America, just as the film pointed out. And he saw in the New Deal steps being taken that he thought were breaking what he called the cycle that was had produced the caste society that had bound blacks to the place in American society that they were. He said there's no panacea, there's no magic bullet that's going to solve the issue of caste in America. It is instead, he said, a cumulative problem. Things are so interwoven, you can't separate them apart and find this is the one that's going to solve the problem, but it has to be attacked on a variety of levels, not just in one particular area. However, it's called the American dilemma because he looked at the nation as a whole, as the comment in the film says. America, he said, is really struggling for its soul. That the issue of race is on people's minds. It produces a lot of discontent, concern. And that's what he meant by dilemma, not that there are 2 difficult choices, but by dilemma, what he meant is perplexing. It produces anxiety. And he said that anxiety comes to the surface whenever etiquette or the escapism on race are breached. And then people feel uncomfortable because they've been thinking about these things and now they have to face them. When he compared the North and the South, he said in the North there is also the caste, there's also race, but there's one element that was missing from the Jim Crow South, and that was the right to vote. He saw in politics, political power, gaining power, one of the key elements by which the structure of caste, which was producing this dilemma among whites and blacks, had an opportunity to be shattered. But it wouldn't be done just by politics, but it would have to be done in a wide variety of areas. But politics, he thought, was really one of the key areas. I thought this was a very powerful film. Raises great questions about race in American society today. The issue of our creed versus our practice, and democracy. Myrdal didn't focus so much on equality as the film does. That's more of the catchword of the recent years, equality. He looked at the American creed as more of a total picture in terms of equal opportunity, the importance of democracy, the idea of rights, constitutional protections, that these are the elements that people believe guide American society, but in fact, as the film points out, it's not what people practice. It is, however, what produces that dissonance within the American society to try to strive toward achieving that creed. And I think that's probably what gave Myrdal the optimism to think that America might be able to deal successfully with its American dilemma. So I'm really anxious to hear what people have to say.
Were there any other comments, responses, or anything that was said by any of the panelists?
I would like to say, I think it's deeper than race. It's, at a deep level, we know certain things are right and certain things are wrong. And so the real issue about race is that we're conflicted in our own soul. Because we know something is wrong, and the reason we're conflicted is because society is telling us it's right. And so that's the conflict right there. I'll let it go, and you can get some other people in.
I'll pass.
Let's open it up.
Okay.
All right, we'll start with this young man here.
Sure.
How do you all think that New Hampshire is like or different than the rest of the country, given sort of the breakup of the demographics here?
Okay, I'll let the long-term New Hampshire residents feel that one.
Well, I don't mind going first.
Excuse me, somebody said, what's the question? The question is, what is the exceptional character of New Hampshire? How is New Hampshire different or like the rest of the country?
Does that seem better or worse?
Just different. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think we're very lucky in New Hampshire. And I say that because we have a structure in New Hampshire that you really can reach out and touch your government. In most places where I came from, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. When I remember as a young person going to the Capitol and visiting the Capitol, those people seem so far removed. Most people in my family who are still in Georgia, they seem so far removed from their government, their local government. New Hampshire is one of those states that takes a great deal of pride in local control. So if you really want to make an impact or change in your state, you really can do that in New Hampshire. But perhaps more so than any other place. So when I look at our laws in our state and how they're challenged against issues like we're talking about tonight, I can tell you I did a lot of legislative liaison work when I was at the state. And I saw very few people like the demographics in this room come to the Criminal Justice Committee, testify on any bills that had to do with incarceration. Right now in New Hampshire, 85% of the people in our prison system are there for mental health and substance abuse. At a tune of close to quarter of a billion dollars a year. And that can easily change in this state if people were to become more engaged. Because you can do so in New Hampshire without a lot of work, unlike other states. And so to me, I find it as an opportunity. We have a citizen legislature. They're not paid. It's 400 House reps and 24 senators. These are positions that most people in this audience could easily put their name on the ballot and make a difference in our state if they needed to, if they wanted to.
That's how it's different. Is there anything the same about New Hampshire and the rest of the country?
Well, I think people are the same all over.
Okay.
I really do. I find some of the attitudes in the South, just like they are here. And this film focused heavily on the southern states, particularly Georgia. So when people think about ignorance or racism, they often point to the South. Which I can tell you, I came to New Hampshire in 1987. I've been called racial names. I filed discrimination actions in the state against state officials, top-level state officials in this state. And I did that very quietly and did my own fight against those things. So some of those issues that are in the South are here in New Hampshire as well. They're not as pronounced, but they're here. And there's a silent voice here that I don't think exists in the South either.
Okay. Either other questions, other comments? Then we'll take the next question. Yes.
Can you talk more about that silent voice?
Well, for me, growing up in Georgia, there's the hotbed of civil rights there. And so in my high school, for instance, during Black History Month and things like that, we had ministers from the community come in, and there was always some advocacy work going on in those communities, and you felt empowered as a young person. My brother's in prison right now for murder, my older brother. My father was a crack addict, beat my mother all the time. But I felt empowered in my community. People made me feel that I was special. People made me feel like I had an opportunity. And these were white teachers and black teachers. But there was no silence. People held you accountable, but also they uplifted you. They made you feel special. And here, you don't find that same embracement. I had 2 daughters. I was divorced, and I raised my 2 daughters here in New Hampshire, in Hampton. My oldest daughter was called, one of the kids on the bus told her, get on the back of the bus, Rosa Parks. Now, I said to her, she wanted to fight, and I said, no, we're not going to do it that way. You go to school and you tell the principal. And so she told the principal she wanted an apology. The principal said that these kids didn't mean it. They were talking to another curly-haired white student on the bus. So I called the school and I said, we have 2 choices here. You can do the right thing, and my daughter's asking for an apology from these students, or I'll get involved. Now, you and I both know what happened. So she went back to school the next day, and they made a young person apologize. But that community was not willing to speak out against things like that. And I have a lot of friends in the state who are white, obviously, and some speak out against racial jokes or racial things like that, and some don't. Some are very silent. I find in New Hampshire it's very quiet and very silent because it's very embarrassing to take on those challenges. Where in the South, they're very willing to take on those challenges.
Could I add to that?
Yeah.
Okay, something that I've noticed in my family and in other people was that I was talking about the success of the civil rights movement. If you look at our families, people that were older, they didn't get the support of the civil rights movement. So by me coming along, when I did, I heard Dr. King, I heard other people speak out on my condition, and that enabled me to think like the chief said. That enabled me to see possibilities that my older cousins, uncles, they couldn't see. So they went down a different path than I did. I understand that the reason I chose the path I chose was because of people like Dr. King, the preachers, and other people who showed me a better path. It didn't happen by accident. It wasn't because of me. It's because the people showed me a better path.
I would just add that if I were Gunnar Myrdal and heard your story, Chief, I would say the American dilemma continues.
Yeah.
And well, because what he pointed to was that psychology that exists that is concealed by etiquette, and that there are times when that etiquette gets broken, and then you see these psychological, these feelings that people have, these views that people have, that they're able to conceal through a kind of behavior that's socially acceptable, emerge. And that's what really bothered Myrdal, was the psychological part that is deep within blacks and whites, because he made the comment that Barack Obama has often made. People talk about blacks differently around their white dinner tables than they do when they're talking to blacks. Blacks talk differently about whites around their black dinner tables than they do to whites. And it's that divide that Myrdal was so careful in pointing out and seeing, and then looking at the causes. How did this come about? And what can be done to try to deal with this? And one of the elements was the separation of the races that produces stereotypes. And these stereotypes then become the way in which people identify one another. So he would say, I would talk to a black man. The black man would say, when I see a white person coming down the street, I see trouble. And why is that? Because they've been conditioned to see, I have to behave in a certain way because that white person is defining how I need to interact with that person. Otherwise, there's going to be trouble. In the Jim Crow South, that could be the local sheriff coming after you, or the lynch mob. But it's still that psychology. So I think when we the answer to the question, what's different between New Hampshire, etc., I think it's not necessarily what you see on the surface, people walking down the street having lunch in the same lunch counters and that sort of thing. It's that subterranean, that psychological sense that people have that continue to carry forward those elements of the American dilemma that Myrdal described in his text in 1944.
And believe it or not, it has to do with economics. If you notice when they were talking about the lynchings, as the economy gets worse, people get more on edge. That's why we in New Hampshire will tend to have less than the states in the South, because people suffer more. As there's more misery, there's a need to kick the dog. That's the bottom line. So as I feel worse, I need to make somebody else feel bad. So what you do is, and that's why you'll notice, as the economy tanks, lynchings will go up. If you look right now, a lot of people are suffering. what happens, you're seeing more racial tension. It has to do with economics.
Okay, here, and then here, and then you. So 1, 2, 3.
My name is Harvey, and I was born, that movie was about me.
Could you stand up, sir?
I can't.
Oh, okay.
I'll stand up for you. My name is Harvey, and I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. And I just got over the flu, so my melodious voice is not present. That movie is me. I plowed in the fields. I had to get off the sidewalk when white folks came down the street. I haven't heard any place tonight. If you believe that the most distal racial points in this country are black and white, the furthest points between black and white is like this, why do we keep calling you black and white? Why are we allowing other people to decide how far we become apart? And we are becoming further apart every time we say black and white. Can we change the language a little bit? I have a lot of other things to say, but.
Is that, are you posing that question to the panel?
I would like to know, yeah,
Okay.
sure.
Okay.
Anybody in the audience, doesn't matter.
Okay.
We need to change the language, how we address each other
Yes.
in this society. There's a black man, there's a white man. Every time you say black, it gets to be scary.
Yeah.
And every time you say white, it gets to be powerful.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it, Ray, 1% of the population own 99% of the money in this country.
Right.
And that underclass is still suffering. They still
Yep.
call white folks and black folks. And we got to change that. How we
Okay.
do it, I think we need a conversation nationally.
Right.
And
Well, let's see what the panelists have to say about that. Who wants to start with that one?
Well, what I would say to pick up on what the professor said and to answer the question is that this dilemma persists because people are afraid to change the dialogue. People are afraid to be accused of being a sexist or racist or a bigot if they raise questions. So if you were a white male and you said, I disagree with Chief Edwards' position on XYZ, some people would say, well, he's racist. That's why he doesn't like him. It could be, you just don't like my policy, or you just don't like me.
Chief, the instance is white supremacy. That's the word I wanted to bring up. That's what rules this country. White supremacy, and it hasn't been mentioned tonight. It hasn't been mentioned on the national stage, and we need to discuss white supremacy.
Right. But I also think too, though, it's healthy to have a conversation so you can get honesty. Most people are reluctant to be honest in our society because there's a punishment for being honest.
Yeah.
If I am honest about my feelings, maybe I need education. Maybe you need to educate me. Maybe you need to explain it to me. Maybe that hasn't been shared with me. But if I come forward and I say something that you find offensive, now I'm punished for that, particularly if I'm a professional person, particularly if I have a leadership role. I'm afraid to say that. And maybe that's an opportunity to have a discussion and educate that person. But we built that, culturally, we condition ourselves to keep this dilemma going.
When do we start the discussion nationally?
Okay, we got a response over
thank
here. Yes, sir.
Sometimes it's how you say it though too. Like I've dealt with people that are different than me all my life. And I find that if you approach a person with genuine respect, no matter how different you are, they pick up on that. And even if you say something dumb, they'll just smile and say, you know, that's kind of dumb. They will. But the bottom line is that you approach the person with respect. And as you approach the person with respect, knowing that you can learn something from anybody. That person is an expert on their life. And so if you approach people like that, you don't get that response. So it's also back on the other person, how you approach them. And as far as, I think to what you said, we all have to do some changing in us because we got to realize that we've been socialized to think certain things. And we're being controlled by other people. And we have to realize that whether we black or white, we're controlled. And somebody else is pushing buttons. There was one of the industrialists back in the 1800s that says, they asked him about, well, aren't you worried about the poor people, they may rise up? He said, I never worry about poor people as long as I can pay one half to kill the other half. The people at the top understand that phenomenon. And you have to understand that you can't let people push your buttons. And we must all free our own selves. Okay? I'm done.
Okay, so here, in the back, and then up front. Yes, ma'am.
I think one of the concerns, for some of us, certainly some of us boomers who already felt like we fought this battle 50 years ago, is the politics of today that seem to want to reinforce the divide. And what I'm speaking to in particular are all the new voter ID laws, voter restriction laws, the gerrymandering that's been going on. And I think it's very troubling because I think the dilemma exists, but then if we have a layer of politics that doesn't want to address the dilemma, but creates more dilemma for us, I think that's a problem. And probably this should be shown in Congress. Point the figure to all those who seem so agitated about the notion that there are Americans who are trying to cheat the system. And that to me is what all these voter ID laws are about, is paranoia about that rather than letting everybody vote without restriction and seeing if we come up with a better outcome.
Myrdal addressed that. He
Did he?
said,
Okay.
Myrdal addressed that. He said those psychological fears that exist are exploited by demagogues. They know how to raise those fears, concerns, or issues such as people getting something for nothing, and then connect it to race.
Because in New Hampshire, you would think, with our great slogan, "Live Free or Die," that we would not be victimized by these latest voter ID laws. I think it's sort of shocking that they actually passed, but as you say, there's that silence underneath that we're not hearing. We're not hearing a real debate about what that voting issues were.
Wait, did you finish?
Yeah, I just made that
Okay,
comment.
then this young lady here, and then Mr. Smith.
I think you'd be troubled to see that.
My question is, they referred to like our unconscious or subconscious,
Yes.
racism, whatever. How do we get past that, and how do we readjust our attitudes to diminish that?
Okay, I'll tell you, here, he says prayer. He says politics.
Here he says
He says it's a
education.
psychological problem. But I'm gonna let them speak for themselves.
What do you say?
Hey, I'm the moderator.
Myrdal also addressed your question, and he has the answer in a statement something like this: hate the race, but love the person. And what he means by that is, by keeping the races apart, the stereotypes command.
Okay.
And once you get to know someone, the stereotypes dissolve. And that one of the ways of dealing with this psychology that you're referring to then is to become familiar with individuals who are black.
Yeah.
If we're dealing with the issue of
But
race.
the black researcher, I thought she was a researcher, said she herself has them about being black when she does those tests.
Oh, you know, their researcher, she was an African American.
She wasn't.
But anyway, so let me now. We're gonna hear if there are other panelists want to respond. Then Mr. Smith.
Daily, what you have to do is you have to realize that you have been taught certain things, and you have to consciously think of, in order to change something, you have to consciously think about it and give it some thought, and then kind of figure out a different strategy for dealing with it. It's a thing for all of us.
Right,
Like me, sometimes when I feel a certain way about a person, I will check myself before I say anything and say, well, okay, that's dumb. You know, anything aren't like that, or some people say something, and I'll correct them. I say, well, that's not true. You know, but it's a daily thing, and it's a struggle, because since you were a child, since I was a child, we've been taught certain things. And those things, we find out a lot of those things are wrong. And I like what he said. You get to know somebody, you'll find out that, you know, they're just people. And I thank God for my life that I've been able to see a lot of different people and see that they were just people. And all this stuff I was given about this person being that way because they're that person or this person, It was all a bunch of trash.
Just very briefly, I just want to just say this. You know, I think also we missed an opportunity, and I don't necessarily agree with the sentiment behind this, but I think it's worth pointing out. As a former police chief, I had the unique opportunity to engage the Tea Party, Free Staters, and also had the unique opportunity to engage those who were in the NAACP around police use of force. Both groups. Both groups have the same exact feeling towards police. And the reason I point that out to you is because they missed an opportunity to collaborate. Because if you went to the NAACP and you said the Tea Party feels the exact same way you do about police brutality, again, not that I agree with the overall notion of that, but they would say, no, they're racist. And if you go to the Tea Party and say, you know what, the NAACP feels the same way you do, well, they're socialists. All these wonderful educated people missed an opportunity to collaborate on something and find common ground where they could get to know each other. And that's the issue. And that's because of what we do with PC in this country. We stop those conversations because we culturally condition ourselves to believe things about people and dismiss them.
Okay. Mr. Smith?
Good evening. The movie for me pointed out two things that I think that we should be concerned about. First of all, I had seen the doll test as a child, you know, probably 40 years ago or more. And what really shocked me is that when you saw kids from 2006 also making the same decision, that means that a lot of children of color still have the Pygmalion effect going on, or that negative expectancy theory. The other side is that there have been laws in the past that have been particularly discriminatory against people of color back hundreds of years, from the Indian Act of 1831, the Dred Scott decision, Jim Crow laws, and those kinds of things. And that combination of the mentality of certain people of color and the institutions that are still in place, Civil Rights Act of 1964 notwithstanding, you have a very complex institutional and systemic challenge that will be extremely difficult to overcome. So you're going to have a multi-pronged approach for you to see any type of real change.
Okay. Any response? You don't have to, but if you want
Well,
to.
just one comment about the NAACP in response to your observation. I noticed in the Boston Globe, I think it was, or else the New York Times, the NAACP reporting statistics about blacks which are contrary to the sort of general notion. The high percentage of blacks who graduate from high school, the high percentage of blacks that are in nuclear families, etc. So this gets to your point, Reverend. We've been educated with a certain perception of the black family, the black community, black education, black achievement, black values that have become part of the cultural norm. And then it gets reinforced visually by picking out particular incidents that say, oh yeah, well that reinforces that, that confirms it. What we should be doing is what you're suggesting, which is really giving us a better picture, a more realistic picture of what is happening within the black family, within black communities, with black achievement, so that that image that has been passed on for years gets challenged publicly. And then that could become part of the dialogue that we were talking about, because right now it's one-sided in terms of the stereotype and image. But we need another voice that gives us a different perspective rather than constantly reinforcing these stereotypes.
Okay. Here, then Elizabeth, then Annie. Mr. Duclair.
Yes, thank you. I'm from Haiti, and I came here about 30 years ago, more than 30 years. And I've never experienced racism in Haiti. I first recognized it here. And to realize that Haiti is the first black country to gain their independence, the reason I never experienced it is because we accepted it as a fact. I mean, a young man coming 20 years, living in Haiti, accepting that black and white dull example that we had here, that it was something that black was inferior and white was superior. We had so few white people who own almost everything, in order to be or to get somewhere, you have to have a white friend. So it's accepted. When I come here, I realize that, you know, there is something that can be done about that, and I understand what was going on. After watching this, one thing that I can say is that it is something, I don't want to call it a fight, because sometimes when you call it a fight, you get a different perspective. It's something that individually can never win by yourself. And the other never that I know is that you should never give up. You should always keep fighting. And as we point out, when you are around the black table, you got a black perspective. When you are around a white table, you get a white perspective. I will come to something like that every day, if I could, to find a poem like that where people can really, black and white, get together and address this issue. Yeah. Because the problem is everybody is addressing it on their own, and everybody is coming with their own solution. And we still have the problem as a community and as a country. So if we can push it where, if there's any idea on how we can get more of something like what's going on right now, going on for the whole community, for the church, for the country, I think that will happen.
Okay, was there any response? There wasn't a question, but is it? Okay, then Elizabeth?
Yeah, I actually have a question for the chief. I'm glad that you brought up voter, like gerrymandering and voter restriction laws, because when I read the paper, I read that that comes from the Republican Party for the most part. So I would really love for you to educate me on, I can't wrap my mind around being black and being Republican. I just can't.
Well, not that I am the national spokesperson. But I can tell you from my own perspective, as I mentioned earlier, my background makes me want to be conservative. Because I looked at my grandparents, who never graduated from high school. My father had a third grade education. As I told you earlier, was a drug dealer and a drug user. And an abuser of my mother, and my family history of violence. But I was taught some very important lessons as a young person. And as I said, my community embraced me, certainly my family to a large extent, but that was a conservative community. Said you're responsible for yourself. And so when I look at the Republican Party, how it was founded by Republicans. So was, and the purpose of the Republican Party was an anti-slavery party. It was established to end slavery. And so, because over the years, we've had a few people in our party who made ridiculous comments about women or about minorities, I am not going to allow them to run me from my party. It's my party. It's a party of my ancestors. It's a party that I believe in. And it's a party that has provided my self-esteem that I have today. And that is one who is independent. That is one who is able to come to a state like New Hampshire at 18 years old and become a police chief in a state where I knew no one. And that is because I realized that some of my actions I own. Some, I am not concerned about someone who hates me because I'm black. I'll challenge that individual and hold that person accountable, just like I did in state government when I ran into that. But being a conservative, to me, is what I want my daughters to be, is what I want young black men to be. I want you to know that you can be empowered by being an individual person. And look at the Constitution. If we just follow the Constitution of this country, we have very few problems. I'm reminded that it's not my country, it's not the Constitution, it's not the flag that put my ancestors in these positions. It was my fellow countrymen who did those things, who advocated for laws to do that. And so if we just adhered and made sure that there were no laws, and they were not enforced in an adverse way, and targeted laws, I think we would have a much better nation. So, to me, I'm very proud to be a conservative person, a Republican. I was very proud to run in this state as a Republican. I ran in a very Democratic district. And I was happy to talk about that, what my life meant to me as a Republican. And that I'm very proud of. I'm not proud of some of the comments been made in the past. But as I said, I'm not going to let anybody run me from the Republican Party, one that was founded to free my ancestors.
Okay. follow-up from the panelists? If not, okay, then,
I don't think they're Republicans.
So,
could you stand up, sir, so we can hear you?
sure.
Thank you.
I just got a little scenario that I'm gonna give people. So, you wake up in the morning every day, you going to work, you get out of your house, and there is a beast, an animal. It's a life-sucking animal, right? And at times, it chooses to attack you. At other times, it doesn't. But it still exists. It's still there. And eventually, if it runs out of whatever it feeds on over here, it may come and attack you over here. My thing is, a lot of time when we look at different issues, we tend to treat them as side issues. So, for example, a lot of people are in this room, and, you know, we're here to deal with racism in this room. But when we leave the room, it's like, yeah, that's left in the room. You know what I mean? A lot of times, whether it's whatever issues with climate, or it's like, hey, when I'm over here recycling, that's the only time I'm dealing with that issue. But to me, we have to have a holistic sense of things, and also just create values based on that. So my story is this. I was not born in this country, and I come from Africa. But ever since the first time I stepped in this country, and ever since the first time I faced racism, it's always been there. It's never went anywhere, and it's always going to be there until, you know, we get rid of it. So I'm thinking to myself, like, if I can see this, and I can see it clearly, so what happens to the people that's been here, you know, all along, whether you're Caucasian or African or whatever identity, you know, whatever group I might identify with. And so, I'm not even going to give a speech, but my question to everybody in this room is this. You know, right, when you leave this room tonight, are you just going to leave the issue in here, or are you going to take it home with you? Because it's something that every time you wake up in the morning, you got to tell yourself, like, yo, that beast is still out there, and it might attack me today. If not, it might attack my, you know, my grandchildren or the future generations. So that's just something for you guys to think about. Thank you.
Elliot, thank you. Response from the panel?
One thing they used to say in the civil rights movement that kind of gave the people a strength, they say, if they come for you in the morning, they'll be back for me in the evening. And when you think like that, when something is wrong, sooner or later it's going to hit you. If you let a sore sit there and fester, it's going to get worse. And that's the ultimate reason for addressing things as you can. And you can't boil the ocean, but you can do something. And so that's what I think about. So I just try to do something. I can't do everything, but I try to do something.
Okay. Here, is your hand up, or are you scratching your head? You're two and you're three.
I have two daughters, and they're both involved with young men who are not Caucasians. And my Boston daughter is very involved, well, somewhat involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. She's been stopping traffic at different times, and I wanted to know what the panel thought about that. She's enjoying and feeling empowered, at least doing something. And one of the first marches she went on, they stood in front of the prison in Melnia Cass Boulevard, and she said, I passed that place I don't know how many times. I never knew there was a prison there. So I want to hear what y'all think about that movement.
Well, I'll make the first comment and sort of answer the question that my friend asked me earlier. Like, what did I think? You know, I actually think that the challenge that we're faced with is one that's rooted in the law and politics and social custom, and it is manifest. It's as our friend, the Honorable Harvey Cash said earlier. It's this issue of white supremacy that is held in place because people believe that there's such a thing as race. How many people here are white? But I asked the question because nobody's white. Nobody's black. We're human. And they did we talk about having evidence-based approaches to the things that we do, and they sequenced the human genome and found out that 99.9% of our DNA is exactly the same. And the part that's different are those things that provide phenotypical features. color of your hair, you know, the color of your skin, melanin. And so, as long as people believe in this thing called race, and they consider themselves either black or white, or any kind of, you know, particular group, then those categories by themselves have certain kind of characteristics ascribed to them. And so while you may meet someone and get to know them and think they're the exception, you know, you still comply with this rule that goes along with this, you know, that ascribes all these characteristics to these categories. So until we take, you know, the weapons, none of us can be held responsible for doing what we can't do. But all of us are responsible for doing what we can. And until we take the science that we have, you know, that says that there's no such thing as race, there's only one race, the human race. And even though, you know, people may treat each other very badly, you know, they're still human on both sides of the equation, and we reach that point, then we're going to be like, you know, kind of stuck where we are. So with that in mind, when you ask about your daughter who's European descent and her involvement with this larger campaign, actually, she's a human rights activist. She's saying that these people, you know, who are being mistreated, you know, they're having their human rights violated. And so she's standing up for that. That's how I see that. Because but the only way you can see that is if you're not stuck in the box of, you know, well, this group is white and they have their particular set of interests, and this group is black and they have their, you know, particular set of interests. I'll turn it over to the panelists.
My first time I was in a march, I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and it was over a Spanish Mexican kid. So I had nothing to do with that, but I knew who he was. We were in the same city, and he got shot while he was in police custody, and it was wrong, and that was my first time I ever was in a protest. And I learned that one of the best speeches I liked by Martin, he was talking about, they were saying that there was an Indian problem, and he said, it's not an Indian problem, it's something that's wrong. And therefore, I'm doing what I can. And I was a little boy, but I understood what he was saying.
Well, my view of the Black Lives Matter movement is shaped from my personal experience and my background. You know, I looked at the situation that originated from the Eric Garner situation and the Michael Brown situation. And Trayvon Martin. But I look at all these as police procedure issues. I don't think you have, well, I know you don't. I can tell you, I commanded white law enforcement officers. I trained white law enforcement officers all over this country. That's not to say that I'm naive to believe that some have not been racist. But the vast majority of law enforcement officers, particularly in this state, are not racist. They're not. Because in order for you to believe that white officers are racist, that you would believe that the little Johnny and little Susan grew up in your neighborhood, put that uniform on and said, I'm going out today and to murder a black or Latino today. I feel that way. That's not what's happening. From a law enforcement leader's perspective, this is about police practices, our culture. Law enforcement has a culture that's unique in and to itself. It's not circled around race, it's circled around practices and policies. If you look at the issue in New York, you have law enforcement officers enforcing a civil infraction. Not their responsibility, really, to enforce something like that. But you have them engaged in a practice like that. And so that's why I said earlier, you don't see this type of demographics in the Criminal Justice Committee when we're passing laws in the state around enforcement. When a law is passed, you give it to the police department, they go out and enforce it. In order to change these things and get back to a point where every life matters in this country, you have to look at what laws are being advocated in the state, what laws are being enforced in the state, and how they're being enforced. How they're being enforced. This has to do with police training. And because of budget issues, the first thing that's cut is police training. So you have officers who do not have the skill set to properly engage people in the conversation. Young people, regardless of their skin tone, are twice as likely to be arrested by police officers as adult people. Twice as likely. Why? Because most police officers aren't going to take a lot of lip from a young person. So they're quickly to arrest those people. Then they say poverty. If you look poor, you're going to have a different engagement.
Okay.
Can I respond to that? Because I think the issue is bigger than that, Chief. For me, the issue is that you just can't have communities where you have 50% of the people unemployed. you know that that's gonna turn out bad, just looking at that. And so we gotta look at it bigger, it's bigger than the police. They're trying to keep a lid on something. They're doing their best. But we have to realize as a society, we gotta look at that and say, that's gonna be trouble. And we have to see that coming, and we have to do something about that and realize that's the real issue. Like when they were looking at Trayvon Martin. Why was Trayvon Martin shot? Well, because we had break-ins. Why did we have break-ins? Because we had a community next door that had 50, 60% unemployment. It's not going to end well. So we got to look bigger than the police issue. We got to look at it and say, well, we just can't have communities. We have that high unemployment rate, and we have to attack it that way. And that way, and when things calm down, then we can see things for what it is.
I don't want to make this a debate between us two, but.
Okay. But there's no response.
No, I have to because I want people to understand this. This is about, not about police, this is about the laws that you're passing. The laws that are being shaped. When I talked earlier about people we're incarcerating, and the film pointed that out too, when you're arrested, you have a misdemeanor record, you have a criminal record now, employment is very difficult to get. So it will always come back to political power. Economic power is shaped by political power, political influence.
Okay.
Agreed.
I think that, well, I had a comment, but this young lady here in the corner, and then I think it was here. Yeah, okay.
Well, something that I have observed being 14 and having a much simpler view on the world than someone of your status. There's a lot of like sorting people into the black statistics and the white statistics. And if we're trying to make one community of people, why are we still separating it unconsciously? Then
I think there's a danger with just throwing it all together, though, because then you don't see what's going on individually. I would love for it to come together. It's kind of like not seeing color. Then you don't see what's going on to the people of color. But I would love to put it all together one day. I think that is the ultimate goal, is to get everything together. But we have to be able to look and say, well, my group is being picked on, or this group is being picked on. And when the groups quit being picked on, then we can move to that whole that I think is the right way.
I'm sorry, do you have a follow-up to his response?
Sort of, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just that when people for example, in law enforcement, and if somebody arrests someone that's African American and they're a white officer, and people will say, oh, that's racist. But if it wasn't racist, then the people that are saying that it is racist are saying, if it did or did not have something of a race issue, it's really just in their brains they're searching for something to racism, even though if we're trying to bring everybody together.
Let me take the moderator's prerogative and respond, and then I think Mr. Smith wanted to say something to the point. But I'll say that, as I said earlier, I believe that race doesn't exist, but I do believe that racism exists. And racism is not personal opinion or prejudice, it's institutional. Everybody here in this room could say, oh yeah, well, we agree, so we're going to do good and we're going to do right. But if we don't, as the chief is saying, if we don't change some of the institutional practices that go on, then we end up getting a very similar result. And when we think about, well, what were these police thinking, when they went out there and did whatever they did? Is it an example of just, poor work habits or lack of training? I say, when we ask ourselves, what are those police thinking? We need to ask ourselves the same question when we say, well, what were those little children thinking when they were sliding those dolls around? Yes, sir, Mr. Smith.
This is the question for the panel.
Oh, no. It's not your question turn.
No. To the group there.
No. It's coming. Hold on. I thought you were responding to her, but it's coming.
It is a response to her because if you give me me a chance to
No,
say
no,
what
no,
I'm
no, no.
gonna
If
say.
you want to ask the question, no.
No, it actually is in response to
Oh,
her
well,
question.
cool. Okay. When your
So-
turn comes, you can ask that question. No, 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 no. I called on you. No, 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 no. I called on you for
What
a
is the
comment.
role of leadership in
I called on you for a
addressing
comment, not a
these
question.
kind of challenges?
All right, thank you. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry.
So my question is, with all the media attention the subject has gotten in recent times, and this is for the panel,
Could
in
you
your
speak a
opinion,
little louder? There's a guy in the
yeah,
back
sorry.
who can't hear, so.
with all the media attention that
Stand
the
up.
subject has been getting, and I'll be pleased. My name is Greg. With all the attention this subject's been getting in the media lately, I guess I'm wondering, in your opinion, are we, has there been a major regression on the subject, or are we just shining the light on something? I don't mean to say just, but are we shining a light on something that still needs more work, or kind of putting the light back on it for a while, or do you feel that we've actually gone backwards?
I think we're shining the light. Other panelists respond?
You know, as I said before, we don't give ourselves enough credit for where we've come from and where we are right now. We really don't. And I'm probably, there's money in racism. Okay, so there's a reason that people keep this going. As I said to you earlier, the PC issue is stifling conversation. And so there are people who have built their legacies, their lives on this issue, and they keep it going. And I point that out to you because as a police chief, I was shocked when I dealt with these two different groups who are adamantly opposed to each other, who agree and they won't come together. Yeah. That's because they've been culturally conditioned, as I told you before, the Tea Party and the NAACP have been culturally conditioned to believe they're each other's enemy, and they feel the exact same way on a police practice.
Maybe now's the time to kick the media. We haven't kicked the media.
Get it to them.
Get it to them. But look what happened with the incidents you're referring to. They became politicized. And then the camp talk came out. That is, this camp says this point of view, this camp says that point of view. Those who follow the particular camps get reinforced from their particular perspective. And the discussion of race, which is really what it generated, gets lost. And the issue, the conversations people wanted to have, what are the institutional impediments to equality within a society? What are there really racial practices or possibly laws that contribute to racial practices within law enforcement? Have we had that conversation? This is what you're suggesting. Let's have that conversation. Are there practices that need to be reviewed and assessed in order to deal more fairly, more equitably with the citizenry, which law enforcement is pledged to protect and serve? But instead we get a politicized conversation, and then we choose up sides based upon that, and the real conversation in terms of the quality of our life or institutional values gets submerged as we get into our tribal political settings. And that's really unfortunate. And that's probably why we haven't had this frank conversation about race. Anytime something tries to bring that up, we get tribalized again. And then we can't get beyond it. It's tribalized either in terms of white supremacy, which is a kind of tribal talk, as well as racist police, that's a kind of tribal talk. We can't seem to get beyond those that dancing around our own fires to reinforce our own particular points of view. It's really unfortunate. So I think in terms of civil rights, we've come a hell of a long way in civil rights. Lots of opportunities that didn't exist before, and it shows the power of law, power of politics, the power of conscience in changing American society. But as Myrdal pointed out, the goal is not, the goal really is to try to close the gap between that creed and those practices, not with the idea that it'll ever be closed, but that the effort is made to try to close that gap. And these dissonances, these feelings that we get when we see someone like Trayvon Martin or Brown, they generate those feelings. We need to do something about that. Now, can we do something? But unfortunately, going back to this point, we don't seem to have the political culture today that allows us to have that productive conversation. And it really is a shame.
Martin said something in 1964 when he accepted his Nobel Peace Prize. He said, "To those to which truth is beauty, and beauty is truth." And I think that's what we got to get back to, is that each side has, you're talking about the sides, each side has these things that they say. But I believe in truth no matter who says it. Anybody could have a truth. And when we become genuine searchers for truth, and also we turn away from lies. Like when I find out you're lying to me, I'm really not going to listen to you anymore. But we've seen time and time again where people have been proven to be liars, but millions of people still listen to them. And I think when we really put a premium on truth, that's when we will get the understanding to have those conversations. But as long as we're talking, as the professor said, tribal talk, or just throwing rhetoric at each other, we're never going to solve anything.
Okay. There's a comment here.
Well, a question.
Question here, yeah.
I think it has a lot to do with social economics. You've all touched on it. It has to do with if you have money that you can spend and be able to live. I mean, now the chief talks about drugs. They can make a whole lot more money in drugs than they can by working for $10 an hour or $12 an hour or $7.25 like we have in the state.
Exactly.
And I think these are issues that have to be, everybody talks about cut the budget, cut here, cut there, cut that. You need to, a guy I worked for, he said, "Mike, if you want to be in business, there's a price for doing business in the state. You don't want to pay that price, get the heck out of the state." And it's the same way in our lives that we're doing. There's a certain cost that has to go with it. And that cost is going to elevate continually. You can't keep cutting because everything still keeps going up. And besides that, we went to a museum in Memphis, Tennessee, in the Lawrence Hotel.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, anybody that goes there, you are put right into the situation that was going on, and it really opens your eyes, and you really understand the situation that was going on and how it was handled and how it was dealt. And I think we all have to get along. I'm of German descent. So what? Okay, that's my culture. I'm proud of it, just like you're proud of it. We're all proud of our origins that we have. And we work I worked in Missouri, and I had this Missourian said, he was an old guy in his 70s. He said, "I don't like you Easterners." I said, "Why?" He said, "You're cold." I said, "What do you mean you're cold?" And he said, "You're cold." And after working with him, I could understand how he felt, because he accepted me as I was that instant. I didn't accept him until I got to know him. You know, and that's basically what we all have to do. And it's just my point that I'm.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Let me, Mr. Smith, you want to ask the question that you had back there now? You cleared out the question. You want to restate the question?
I'd like the group to talk from the perspective of leadership, because I think that any of these institutions and systems that we have that are not working, that are not acceptable right now, need to be changed. But I think there's a lot of frustration in the masses because they don't understand the role of leadership in those changes. And there are people in leadership capacities that kind of shrink away from actually trying to make change because of being politically correct. So since we have some fairly distinguished leaders up there, I'd like some of their comments on what they think we can begin to do to address some of these larger complex systems, because without change, all we're going to have is the same thing, or worse.
Want some bite off? Take the first bite off of that.
You're on, Chief.
Well, thank you for the question, Andrew. I think, particularly in this state, we do have strong leaders in this state, but race is difficult for people to talk about. And I'm of the mindset that I spend less time talking about race and more time talking about things that will really make a difference. And from my, and I keep going back from my perspective, from my background, what I do, I see the most effective way to bring about change in our society is to look at laws that have been advocated and how they've been enforced through the Constitution. I mean, that's the perspective I bring to this. And so when I look at leaders who, a perfect example, the cocaine crack issues. Right? Typically speaking, people will look at crack, and I know this personally because I have a brother who suffered from it and a father, that you get a harsher sentence for crack than you do powder cocaine. Last year in the legislature, there was a gentleman who was considered a crazy Republican who put a law in to make sure that you got the same punishment for powder cocaine as you got for crack, or vice versa. Right? I said this to a group of people in Nashua that you guys should go out and testify and support this person, and they didn't want anything to do with it because of him. And so when you talk about leadership, you have to look at beyond the rhetoric that people say and look at their practices, their policies, what they're actually doing. And that's what we don't have. So when you look at somebody that says, I'm here to help you. Like when I worked in government, well, I still do, don't I? Well, but when I worked in government as a police officer, you know, we would laugh sometimes, you know, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. That became a real joke, because nobody really buys that. Right? That became a real joke.